Hi everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Keeping It Real with Aarti and me. Before we start anything, I'd like to say something on behalf of both of us. The topic that we're going to be talking about today is broken heart. And this is something that Aarti and I are dealing with. And this is a journey, as many of you will appreciate. It's not an easy journey. And for both of us, it is still an ongoing journey. And that makes it that much, it makes us that much more vulnerable when we talk about it. And as I said, you'll appreciate it's not an easy journey, but we still wanted to talk about it because we do believe that this is a journey that everyone goes through in one form or another, and talking about it will help other people going through similar painful journeys. Having said that, this is actually a trigger warning. So there will be times in the episode when both Aarti and I might have to pause to collect our thoughts or our emotions, and I'll ask you to bear with us. Okay, so here we go. So this episode, Broken Heart. Now I'll start off with a very, very interesting line that I read, and it apparently is scientifically proved. Did you know that the brain registers extreme psychological pain in the same area that it registers physical pain? Isn't that amazing? Which is why when you feel tremendous pain, sometimes you just feel it in your heart, right? And there are so many reasons that you get this tremendous psychological pain that causes a broken heart. It could be because of death of a loved one. It could be the death of a family member. It could be a death of a pet. It could be because of a breakup, right? It could be a breakup that you didn't want to happen. It could be because of legal separation, which could be a bitter legal battle, and it breaks your heart when things go so negative, right? And there are so many reasons. You know, losing your childhood home, right? That could cause heartbreak. Losing something of tremendous sentimental value, that could cause heartbreaks. So there are so many reasons that causes heartbreak, right, Aarti?
Very much. And you know, a lot of the things that you mentioned are still out there. Like, for example, a legal separation. In India, unfortunately, we criminalize the other person. You know, it's just that two adults are not getting along, but families jump in and then they make it so ugly and all of that. But these are still, many of the things that you mentioned are still what people can relate to with grief and with broken heart. But I want to mention three aspects of grief that people don't really acknowledge sometimes. And the first is what I would call complicated grief, and it often mimics and is misdiagnosed as depression. And you know what happens in complicated grief? It's not straightforward like the regular grief process that is documented. You will have feelings of feeling very, very low. There's going to be memories that are going to keep coming up, preoccupation with the person that you've lost. And you know what happens? You're also yearning for the person that you've lost and everything. And where this becomes a problem is the person becomes smaller and smaller, and then, you know, they no longer want to engage with anything in life. They're no longer interested in things. They're unable to sleep because, you know, these thoughts that are going back and forth in their mind. And that's when it's gone beyond 6 months and all that, prematurely gets diagnosed by a person who's not listening to the whole picture or not looking at the whole picture, saying that this is probably depression, when it's just complicated grief. And complicated grief actually requires very empathetic therapy. And that's one area of grief that I'd like to inform people, because, you know, nursing a broken heart is sometimes one of the most painful things. For me, complicated grief was misdiagnosed as depression when I was 19. And what did I lose? I lost the election in college, the Senate elections. In fact, I think when we sat down in WCC one day and we were talking, I was telling you about how so many people stood against me. People I considered friends stood against me in a strike, and I was 19 and I was seeing people playing out their hidden agendas. And at 19, I didn't understand the world as well as I do now.
You are still not fully yourself to be able to stand against. See, right now, if 200 people stood against me, I can stand with the strength of my convictions. But at that time, you're still just building your own convictions.
You know what was most painful in that complicated grief process, Anu? The people I trusted in my department, in my professors, the friends I thought would stand by me were the ones that stabbed me in the back. And you know, I struggled for a whole year without friends. For a whole year in the mess and hostel, I sat alone when everybody else had a peer group. And as a teenager, sitting alone is probably one of the most painful things, because Christmas celebrations in college, I was alone. And these are big things in college, like in adolescence, these are very big things. And that complicated grief, just getting up in the morning used to be so painful. And that's when a therapist that I sought help with said it's depression. But it wasn't. It was much later when I went to Delhi and I started working through, I realized it was complicated grief. The second kind of grief that is even more complex and the most misunderstood is disenfranchised grief. And this is when the grief is for something that's not socially acceptable. Very painful. I'll give you a couple of examples because I'm working with a couple of clients in this area. So there is a person who's gay. He's not yet come out with his family because there are a lot of other issues associated with him coming out, though it's legal right now in the country. His partner has abandoned him and he cannot speak about it because when your husband or wife leaves you in an opposite gender, in a heterosexual marriage, you can still go and tell somebody he abandoned me or she abandoned me. But when you've not yet come out, there is so much social stigma associated with being gay, and you can't really tell people that, listen, the person left me. And that suffering that. I'll give you another very painful situation where a mother has a miscarriage and she's still mourning that fetus. Okay? And I've known people who've mourned for 40 years with disenfranchised grief. I can give you also people who are HIV positive. Though there is a lot of awareness now, I know that, there is still a lot of social stigma associated with it being sexually transmitted, people looking at it from the moral lens and things like that. And also, sometimes chronic illnesses, which are not obvious. Like, if you have like a limp or if you have like a physical condition that people can understand, it's different, but it's internal and it's something that you can't tell another person. The symptoms are much more intense because it's socially accepted, and I don't have the social support that I would normally have if I lost a parent or if I lost a job or if I lost an election. And that's why this is a much more painful form. And also an extramarital affair that goes wrong. There's nobody to support you because everybody's going to look at you from the moral lens saying, what were you thinking? I was not thinking, I was feeling. Right? I just felt connected to this person. I'm not saying that, this is right, wrong. I'm not going into that debate at all. The emotions that the person feels in that grief process are very real. And the last kind of grief that I would like to mention is the anticipatory grief. When somebody is terminally ill and you're going to lose them, or it's your contract coming to an end, your schooling year or your college year coming to an end, and that you're no longer going to be a student. All these are anticipatory grief. And I'd like us to understand that each one of these can cause a broken heart, and each one of these is going to be completely different. So no one is going to be able to guide you out of it but your own wisdom and your own courage. And
Absolutely.
that's where I'd like for us to understand why, like I can give you an example. When I lost my dad, and today when I was preparing for the session, I realized it's going to be 10 years and it seems like it's just now, and when I lost my dad, I thought I was ready for losing my mom whenever that would eventually happen. I lost her after 8 years. Believe me, it's completely different. It's nothing on the earth prepares you for it. And I want each one of you to know that you may have experienced many forms of grief, and each one is so precious because the love that you've shared is real. The beauty about all of grief is that love was real. Khalil Gibran talks about how sadness and grief are when there is love in your heart but no person to give it to.
Yeah.
And that's why it's very important to realize, unlike anger or hatred or any of these other states, grief is something that comes because something that was such a beautiful source of joy for you at some point is now the same thing that turns back and gives you so much grief. And let's try and understand it a little more. I know I'm not going to be sorry for feeling emotional or tearing up, because I want you to realize that it's coming from a space of very deep love. And we can all feel this. And the more vulnerable we are, the more beautiful this process becomes, because we start acknowledging that something was beautiful. We start understanding that it was beautiful. And though it's not there in the form that it was, whatever we can make of it now will be beautiful. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was one of the first few people who documented the process of grief, she did say that there are stages, that you'll start with denial, then you'll have anger, then you'll have bargaining, then you'll have depression, and then you'll have acceptance and all. Believe me,
No.
it was probably the only theory that existed at some point. And then the dual process of grieving model came, where you'll have the loss orientation and then you'll do the restoration orientation and all that. I think they're very beautiful theories. When I studied them as a psychologist student, they were beautiful theories nevertheless. And yes, there was denial, there was anger, there was bargaining, but believe me, it doesn't happen that way, because every person grieves differently. And it's very difficult for us to, lay a finger there and say, this is how you'll grieve. After 6 months, you'll feel like this. None of that, because each person grieves very, very differently. And, the triggers are going to be different. You're going to have different experiences around it. And, these things like time will heal and all that, I don't really believe. The second is that grief is a linear process, is the biggest myth I've heard. Where you'll go through denial, you'll go through anger, then you'll go through bargaining. Believe me, you will feel, okay, I'm over this grief right now. I'm ready. I'm in a good place and all that.
Like hell.
And then it'll come and stare you apart. And you're like, did you really think you were over it? And then there will be 2 days of, oh my God, I am not over it.
Yes.
And that is such a painful process.
Because when it hits you, it's a double whammy, because you have just convinced yourself that yes, I have now come to terms with the grief and I am capable of, stoically moving forward. It comes and hits you with a force that makes you buckle at the knees. You just collapse, right?
Yes.
And then you realize, oh man, I thought I was okay. I was okay, but now I'm not. And again, I have to go through that grief. Again, I have to go through that, that feeling of not having him there anymore.
Right. And that's where there was a very beautiful theory that I saw as an animation. I've not been able to find the source, and at any point that I find the source, I will share it with people. So it's a beautiful animation. So what they say is, let's say we draw a circle, and inside that circle is all that you consider your life. So all your relationships, all your work, all your achievements, all your mistakes, everything is inside that. And when you lose somebody that you love very deeply, that circle and everything inside that, whatever you built, gets affected by the fact that this person is no longer in your life, or this situation, or this whatever it is you lose, and it gives you grief. Now, originally they believed that the circle will become smaller, and one point you'll have no grief at all and you'll be over the grief. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The circle remains the same. But as you cope, as you move, you start building a world around that, and the circle becomes larger, but it's another circle. It's not the same circle. So when an anniversary comes in, your dad's birthday comes in, or there is a trigger, you have to meet this person that you were with, and you bump into them, the circle shrinks and you go back to that original point where you had to grieve. And I thought that was probably the most beautiful explanation of grief, and why we will move on in spite of it.
Yeah.
But we never really completely let go of it. And the ones who say they've let go of it are usually people who have either repressed or suppressed it, not having, dealt with it.
For me, what I felt was, I think we have to accept grief and loss as part of life, right? If we do not accept it as part of life, and part of the components of life that makes us realize the value of many things in the past and the future, if we don't look at it as that, then it becomes very, very hard to kind of, let it in. That's why I think many people just push it out.
First, we need to understand that our heart is broken. right? Because the understanding that the heart is broken, but it's not going to be visible to other people. We may be smiling, we may be completely strong on the outside and all that, but inside we are crumbling, and we'll need to understand and acknowledge that this is happening. Because unless we understand and acknowledge, moving on or healing that is not going to happen. And second is to acknowledge that it's important for us to go through some of these emotions. But now maybe you should take over and say, those things like, I'm always there, please. I think that's very important.
No, because for me there was no doubt I was going through grief, right? Because I knew, because I'd lost the man who was most important to me in my whole life. So I knew this is a very hard journey I'm on. And then I'll have people coming and telling me, be strong. And I'm saying, don't tell me to be strong, because it seems as if you are like not empathizing with my, where I am, and you're like giving me an order. Instead, I would have appreciated if they had said, I know you're going through a hard time. I wish you strength to get through this. I would have appreciated those kind of, words of support. The second thing is all fate. Okay, I don't want fate. I don't want a reason. Okay, it's a fact. I am not going to say why, because that is not the way I process. There might be other people for whom it might be comforting to say that, if they had a faith, then the God has taken them back, and if they had a faith in fate, then it's fate. Yeah, but I don't question it, because I look at death as a fact. So then coming and telling me it's all fate doesn't comfort me in any way. Okay. Then the third thing is, which we spoke about, don't worry, I am there.
I'm not crying for you. I want my dad back.
Yes. If I'm feeling sad that I've lost a relationship, then if that is a relationship I wanted, then that's what I want. I'm not looking for a substitute or a stand-in. So don't say, that don't worry, I am there. Instead, I think it might be nicer if someone says, I can only imagine how hard it must be. If you want to talk, I am there. I found that during this journey, when people said that, if you want to talk, I am there, comforted me so much. Mm-hmm. Whether I take them up on the offer or not, it doesn't matter. And the last one, which I certainly think, which I will now hand the ball back to you, Aarti, is saying time is the healer. Time is not the healer, because grief will take its time. Okay, it is a harsh teacher which will ignore time. It is not a function of time. So don't think time is going to heal. It's only your intention to heal that is going to make the difference.
Right. And I wanted to add one more part, Anu, that beautiful story of Pooh and Piglet visiting Eeyore. You remember that one?
Oh,
that's
that
a very
so
cute story, isn't it?
Yeah.
So basically, I'm going to narrate it just for those who haven't heard it. So Eeyore is depressed perpetually, and so Piglet and Pooh have not heard from Eeyore. So they decide to go across the forest with their boots and their coats and all that. And then when they reach there, Eeyore is sad, and he says, please go away, because I'm really sad, and I don't want you to hang around somebody who's very, very sad and all that. And Piglet and Pooh just decide to sit there. And then Eeyore asks them, why? What are you doing here? So they say, I understand that you're not feeling really up to it, but we just wanted you to know that we're going to just sit here, because that's what friends do. And if you can't say the right things, like Anu was saying, at least just stay silent. Because sometimes for me, what worked whenever I've lost somebody is the silence, because I'm somebody who processes it completely internally. I don't need to talk about it to you to process my grief. And when people incessantly talk about, so how are you feeling right now? Do you want to talk? It's really painful for me to verbalize some of my things, and which is why I seek silence. And there may be people who want to talk. If they want to talk, be that person who can listen non-judgmentally. If you are that person who can be silent, stay silent.
I was going to tell you the exact thing about how a friend of mine, during one of my deepest moments of sadness, she came and my hand is like this. She just put her hand here and she would do this. That's all. She didn't say anything. She just sat next to me, and that was so comforting for me.
And that's really where I'll move to the second part of the healing process, which is acknowledgement and recognition. So what you need to know is that you must grieve. Sometimes saying that, it's over, I'm now moving forward and all those things prematurely, it'll bring you back to same point in a short while. So you'll need to realize that something happened or did not happen the way you anticipated, expected, or would have preferred it to be. And so you'll need to go through it, stay with it. And when you stay with it, there will be emotions of anger. Anger will definitely come because it's a beautiful emotion for change. To be able to bring about change, anger is very important, because you will feel angry with yourself for having made some things or not done some things. You will feel angry with the other person for what they've done, what they've not done, for having left, so many things. There will be an element of guilt. I could have done this, I should have done this, those kind of things. And then there will be also bitterness for a lot of us. There will be shame. In some relationships, there will be a lot of shame. There will be definitely elements of remorse. There will be resentment, so many of these. And it's very important to sit with each of these emotions, because each emotion is coming to tell us how to move ahead. And if I'm going to say, no, I'm always positive, that toxic positivity, I'm always positive, I will be completely positive through this, I will think positively, do affirmations. During grief, none of those things work, and that's very important, not to take life coaching advice just like that from the internet and try and use it in the grieving process. And then you will move to compassion, resilience, empathy, all of these beautiful aspects of healing. But if you do not stay with it, don't stick with it, it becomes very, very difficult.
When one of my relationships broke, right, I felt all those emotions that you mentioned, right? I felt resentment that the person whom I invested so much in did not respect it enough to try and save the relationship. Okay, and I felt shame that my judgment was so bad that I made a decision like that. I felt betrayal that after I had made all these huge changes, I am now in a state where I am not supported. You have to go through it, acknowledge every emotion that accompanies that process, instead of ignoring it and saying, I was sweeping it under the carpet and saying, I don't feel it. It doesn't work.
And that's what will happen, Anu, because a lot of people I know, and especially people who come in for therapy, they would have suppressed what they consider negative emotions. For me, all emotions are good. All emotions are good. There are no negative, positive, good, bad emotions. It's just that how we express them changes. And they're perceived as negative. Like when I get angry, I hit somebody, then it's negative. But when I get angry and I channelize it in the right way, it's a very beautiful emotion. When I feel guilty and I acknowledge that it's a form of love, then it becomes much easier, So we'll do that at some other point, but I'd like for us to understand that every emotion is positive. And if I do not give space for that emotion to flow beautifully, I'm going to actually suppress also joy, happiness, love, and a lot of other positive states. And that's why it's so important to grieve, because grief, that's why, the winter, cold and all that are associated with grief, because they keep you very solid and hurt and, sort of like a block of ice. It doesn't help you, just go with the flow of life. And that's where it's very important for us to feel it. So I'll just go on to moving on, because, we've talked very deeply about death as one loss, but I'd also like for us to understand that death is still something that we can acknowledge and deal with, but, a broken relationship, a friendship, a marriage, an intimate partner relationship, a business partnership, all of these are much more painful. Because what will happen? You'll have to see that person sometimes every day.
Yeah.
And then not have the reactions or the triggers coming up. That's the more painful one, because and like I said, if it was an extramarital affair or something, it becomes even more complex. I mean, you add more elements to it, it becomes more and more complex. So that's where we'll go with what can we do, because one of the most difficult things that people have is letting go of a relationship that didn't work out. And I've probably nursed a broken heart for the last 1 year or so, because one of the most beautiful relationships in my life didn't work out the way I wanted to. And I was trying to communicate back with the person, but the person just decided to build this wall and say, no, I'm not going to engage with you anymore. And that was very painful, because this was something that was a very joyful part. And I remember the last year, May, June and July were like the worst. And I kept pushing myself and pushing myself and pushing myself. December, I took a month off and I said, no, I need to work with this grief. Otherwise, because I was also dealing with my mother having died just few months before that. And then the most significant relationship having died, the person moving on and refusing to speak to me, causing so much anxiety, so much sadness. And December, I had to take a whole month off to just work on myself because my body was falling ill. Because it could not take the pressure of pretending that I was strong. This is where the first rule is, don't engage with the person if the relationship is over. I made the mistake of going back, trying to speak, trying to call, trying to text, thinking that somehow there would be some kind of closure. That's really sad. And you know what also was happening was there were gifts that were there were reminders of photographs and things like that, and every time I would go back, I was like, oh, it was so beautiful, it can still become that way. And so I didn't get rid of those things. So it's very important sometimes to get rid of these things that can be constant reminders of the person who's chosen someone else or something else over you, and it's important to do that.
Yeah, you know what, when you say this, I realize I've gone through an exactly identical situation. But in that, like when I was about to lose Amma. And at that time, I realized the person who was very important to me at that time chose somebody else's very small thing, very small need over my necessity to get there to the airport in time to be in India before Amma passed away. Okay, and in that moment of clarity, in that 1 second, I knew my mother is dying and you don't put me first. What kind of a friend are you? Fatak. And until then, I thought that was my dearest friend. It opened, and so I still feel terribly sad that I was made to realize that at that point in life. Amma's, they've said there's 5% chance, and I am worried I'll miss my flight and I'm stressing about it, and you are stressing about something else very simple like some application or something. It shows your priorities, and if I am not a priority at this time, then I misjudged you as being one of my best friends, and that made me so sad because that was hope broken.
I get what you're saying. That, like you're saying, the heartbreak is not as painful as the hope going out of life, right? I mean, and I think that's what happens when people we've loved, people we've respected, move on and make choices. Should I move on to the next part of the healing process, which is let go of the story or the narrative? Okay, because what happens when we're in a relationship, especially if it's a intimate partner relationship, one of those emotions running high, hormones running high kind of thing, we usually build a narrative around the person, like the knight in shining armor, this really amazing person and all. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the narratives I've built also, right?
Yours might be knight in shining armor. My narrative is, there is this person who will love me, devotional love it will be, and that will complete me. That used to be my narrative.
I know we're laughing because, sometimes these self-deceptive patterns in relationships come and haunt us when the relationship ends. Because what is happening? The person has moved on, but our narrative has not moved on. Because we are still feeding fodder to that narrative that this person is actually good and all, but something that I can do can somehow salvage the relationship, make it all right, make it whole, make it whatever.
And bring it back to the way it was.
Bring it back to where it was. Even if you do bring it back, it won't be the same. Because, it's gone through that very painful, bitter kind of turmoil. The other person and you will no longer be able to work through the relationship with the way you were able to do earlier. So it's very important to let go of these self-deceptive narratives that we build around it. The third is acceptance is a very silent process. It's not going to come out beating drum and all that and say, listen, I'm ready to move on kind of thing. And this is where I used something, and I would like to share it because, like I was telling you, the last year was one of the most painful. I used something called conscious uncoupling. and it's a process that is beautifully outlined by a psychologist by name Catherine Woodward Thomas. I used her book. I didn't do the course, but I used her book and I worked on myself. And it has 5 very simple and beautiful steps. Simple in her words, but when we work through it, it's very intense. So the first part in that is finding emotional freedom. Okay, and when I say finding emotional freedom, you need to realize that you'll go through a lot of these so-called negative emotions, so-called guilt and all that, but start realizing that they can be used as positive drivers in your life. So, for example, you feel very, very anxious. So you start realizing what requires change in your life, because anxiety leads you towards decisions for the future. You're trying to control the help you use your emotions as a positive driver. And this emotional freedom is very important because it's no longer keeping you stuck, it's helping you expand and become a larger version of yourself. The second step, which is very important, is reclaiming your power and yourself. Because what happens in most of the relationships is that we start the blame game and all that, and we start feeling that somehow we are powerless, we can't do this, I'm broken. These words, typically when there has been a heartbreak, we say I'm broken, I'm shattered, I'm lost. These are words.
Yeah, and I always fail at this. I am never good at relationships.
So reclaiming your power is actually taking responsibility for what happened without blaming yourself for it. Taking responsibility, saying, yeah, it was beautiful at this point, it's not working out this way, what can I do about it? So that's the second part of it. And I'm not going to be a victim, basically. That's really what happens. The third is where you break patterns and you heal your relationships. And you'll notice people who had breakups and all that will have similar patterns in relationships, like typically have the rejection pattern, or somebody who's not acknowledging them, somebody who's not respecting them, somebody who takes them for granted. So to start understanding, these are my repeated patterns in personal life and professional life, and this is how I need to work through it. And it all requires a lot of time in terms of, like when I said, time doesn't heal, intention heals. We need to, with intention, look into what needs change. Because if I don't heal this, I'll go into a rebound, find another relationship that makes me feel good, keeps me distracted, and pulls me back into the same thing. So the healing is very important for me to realize I need to move forward. The next is become a love alchemist, she says, and that was my most beautiful takeaway from the whole thing, where she says you are capable of positive changes in your life, of making love possible in your life, for yourself and for other people. And to be the alchemist in that one is very important.
For the alchemist, I'd like to add one more thing. You remember I said my narrative used to be that, I'll have this devotional love that I will get from this partner of mine who will complete me. And then I realized, no, I am complete, right? I am good. It is okay. And then I am also capable of tremendous love. And that means I get love in return. See, that's the beauty of it, right? The moment I start, when you say love alchemist, when I give out so much love, and it comes from a genuine place of warmth. It's not like I'm doing one fake, oh, here I am. Not that. I'm just saying that, I genuinely have a lot of love and affection. But the once I'm able to exhibit that love and affection, automatically I get tremendous love. And it is the kind of love that I've always wanted.
And the analogy for that one in nature is where, the moon can shine bright only when it acknowledges the darkness, right? Because if the moon decides to hide in the night sky, it's not going to be the moon anymore. And that's really what it is. In spite of all these relationships falling apart and becoming darkness in our life, we can choose to be the love, the light, the alchemical part. And Catherine's Woodward Thomas' last point, which is my favorite, prepare for the happily even after. We are so dreamy.
I love it.
So, we are believing in the ever after, happily ever after. But she says, even if things fall apart and you're not able to move forward, remember there will be an even after, and you need to be ready for that and prepare yourself for it. So the 5 steps that she beautifully outlines with exercises and everything are what I personally used, because before that, I had not heard of conscious uncoupling, but after I've done this, I've also worked with several clients, and we've found beautiful results, because what happens is you heal from a space of love, and you realize that it's time to let go of this person, and not because there is no love anymore or anything, but it's just that whatever this relationship had to bring to my life, it's already brought it,
Yeah.
and to hold on to this is going to be poisonous now. To just let it go and to realize that the self-love that I have in my life is what will take me forward to the even after.
This even after is something that resonates very strongly with me, because I remember someone asking me, what do you think is your biggest success in life? And I said, for me, the biggest success in life is the fact that despite all the failures I've seen, the failures in relationships, the failures in whatever businesses that I wanted to do, whatever it may be, I am still smiling, I am still happy, and I still believe that the world is a beautiful place and life is wonderful. I think that, and it's not just some platitudes I'm uttering.
And I see that in you, Anu. I mean, I've known you enough to see you fail many times and rise up each time, right? Sometimes, you just have people talking about one failure and how they rose. And I know of people like you who probably been bashed this side, that side. It's almost like, get up and then get hit this side and then this side. And, sort of like that. But that's really how life is. And so we'll move to also the very fact that some relationships you'll just have to realize that it needs closure. I can talk about, sometimes, especially in therapy, when we work with some clients, they've met somebody who they've, built into the soulmate narrative. And I'm saying soulmate narrative because, when you are looking for some way to validate a relationship that may not be socially validated, like an extramarital affair, you believe that this is your soulmate that's come in and, you have a past life connection and all of these. Even if it is true or whatever, what I'm trying to tell you is, those are beliefs and those are narratives that you've given to keep it alive, right? And then what happens is you can't get a decent closure out of something like that. We have to acknowledge that sometimes you may feel a beautiful emotional connect with somebody. It may be the most beautiful time in your life, but it still may not be for the entire lifetime, and you have to give closure. And this is where, for other people who may be the wronged partner or whatever, socially, righteousness comes in saying, this is cheating, this is all of these confusing narratives. And don't put the person down, because nobody gets into genuinely breaking marriages and things like that. Sometimes all of us falter, and that's where we need to realize that whenever it is that you get that feeling, this may not work out, this is not something that's going to work out well for me and the other person or the people involved, give it a genuine closure and move on. Because it's extremely important to acknowledge that some of these things may seem very painful but may be necessary.
One of the things, it reminded me of a friendship. I wanted to talk about ghosting. Okay, and ghosting is a term that our this generation uses, I think, when someone just suddenly stops talking to you. That's it, And this happened to me way back in 2006, 2007. And my friend and I, we were both so bewildered that this guy just one fine day stopped taking our calls. We were very close. All three of us were very close. Stopped taking our calls, stopped responding to our messages, just cut us out. And we were so bewildered, right? And we were like, what just happened? And would you believe it, for me, closure happened last year. And the closure happened last year when I met him at a mutual friend's party, and I looked at him and I said, hello, doing well? Good. That was my closure.
And you're at least lucky that happened. There are many people who struggle because even that doesn't happen. It's just that, the ties have been cut off, and then there is no closure at all, and it becomes so bitter. So if you do get closure, great. Otherwise, give the closure, because sometimes it may not be so much about getting the closure as much as you giving the closure, because it's important for the mind to say, okay, now I know. Because physically you no longer see the person, physically they're no longer sharing your space, but mentally to give that space saying, I don't think this is going to happen. And that's where I'm going to lead to the faulty patterns, because a lot of people have faulty coping mechanisms when relationships fall apart, the first is stalking the person on social media or in real life. So I know you're laughing, but I mean, social media happened to me just 10 years back, right? Like Facebook and all came up only now. But before that, if you didn't see them, out of sight, out of mind was there. Like if they were not there, they were not there. Now you can probably track them anywhere across the world. I even know one girl who has the password of her ex's Instagram account.
Oh my
and
goodness.
she keeps going and seeing who he's with and everything. And he has no idea that, she's been stalking him like this. And it's a really weird thing, because the moment you keep doing that, you're keeping those memories alive in a very funny way, in a very dysfunctional way. I won't say funny, but
It's unhealthy, right?
it's a very unhealthy way, because the moment you're stalking, you're just giving yourself the message that I'm not over you, I'm not moving on, I'm going to stay there. And you may say it's for fun. Don't normalize it, because the moment you normalize something like stalking, that's when it becomes dangerous. And we've heard of very, very dangerous forms of stalking as well. And in a country like India, stalking is not taken very seriously by the legal system, because no physical harm was intended. And it's not as easy as that. It causes a lot of emotional stress to the person who's being stalked. So please understand that. The second is harassment, especially when there has been a legal separation and there has been a child custody battles and all that, constantly harassing the other person for money, for not allowing visitation, those kind of things, and then going online, writing in magazines about the other person and all that. See, it's over, right? It's over. Don't keep pulling it back and talking about that person and harassing them, because that's just telling you that you're not yet healed, and you're using all that anger against that person in the most dysfunctional way, making it more difficult for anybody involved to move on and forgive.
When you start talking about something very personal in the press, then you are compelled to try and paint yourself in the best light possible. If you say it often enough, you will end up believing it. It's not doing anyone any good, right? Just accept what happened, deal with it as facts, instead of trying to restructure it into something a bit more acceptable and more palatable for other people, because other people are not important. You just see how you
more
feel.
Sensational, not even palatable, Anu. Right now the world uses the word sensational, right? Especially the more high profile something is, the more sensational, and people just absorb this information and think, oh, then what happened, this must have happened, that must have happened. Sometimes two people just don't get along. There need not be a third person involved in the equation, but they'll create a third person. Those kind of things, I really feel those kind of harassment things should stop. The third area is, there is a recent study that says that when you let go of a person, or a person leaves you, you will have some kind of reaction which is like cocaine addiction in your brain, meaning that you will want to go back to that person, and so will create a lot of very delusional stories about how this person is going to come back. Or I saw that there was a heart emoji that was put on my post, or something like that. So you start building a huge story around nothing. Like that person who left you could have just asked, how is she doing, or something.
Oh, he's still interested in my well-being.
Still interested in me, or he's thinking about me, or genuinely the person would have smiled across the room or something. You say, oh, now this smile means something. So this addictive nature of heartbreak is something. So give yourself the story of a closure and move on. If this relationship is meant to happen, and I mean if in really bold letters, if it is meant to happen, it will come around in only another form. The same person is not going to come back to you, and it's not going to ever be the same. So please cut it out and stop fooling yourself about it.
I know people who know that this guy doesn't treat you well. He's not really respectful of you. And he's also expressed disinterest in continuing the relationship. Still moping about that guy and saying that he will realize how good I am, and one day he will discover and come back to me. I think it's like living, not only are you living in a fool's paradise, you are cheating yourself of life.
Exactly.
This is cheating yourself of life, because life can be so glorious if only you would see it for what it is. Instead, you're making it up to be something else, something which it isn't, and you're just cheating yourself of whatever possible joy you might have otherwise found.
And that's where they say, holding on sometimes causes more pain than letting go. because you're actually holding on to hot coals and it's going to keep burning your hand. It's not as easy as letting go. And this is where Anu, since you mentioned this narrative, I'll give you another narrative on this one. So there was this girl who was in a very abusive marriage, and she knew, she was in therapy and she knew she had to move on. Her parents were fully supportive of it. Her mother, her father, everybody came into the therapy session and said, no, I don't want her to go back because there's a lot of domestic violence. I want her to let go. But she said, no, I'll give him one more chance. And for a whole year she would go back, get battered, and it'll become a police case and everything. And even the police inspector at one point said, why are you going back and all that. But these are very complex patterns. They are complex patterns, and I'm not going into why the victim never leaves. But what I also want to make a point here is this deceptive narrative and this addictive aspect of it. What she did finally was, somebody brought an astrologer, and the astrologer said it's time for you to move on, and she took that step.
But that is externalizing responsibility, isn't it?
Exactly. And that is not moving on as much as, you put the blame on somebody else, saying, I walked out only because the astrologer said it won't work out. If it is your life and it is your relationships, it is your responsibility to sometimes say no. And that may be a difficult decision, maybe the most difficult thing you do in life, but it may be also the most glorious thing you do for yourself. And that is very, very important. Another aspect is also checking with friends and associates about how the other person is doing. Is he fine? Is she fine? All those things. Please, if you have common friends, at least set certain boundaries, saying we're not going to talk about the person who's absent. That's a very important thing when you've moved on. And the last is, and most shameful of all, calling that person when you are in trouble. Okay? Relationship is not worked. Calling and saying, listen, I have nobody else. And
This is like guilting them into coming back, is it?
Guilting them into coming back. Self-pity narrative, no? I have nobody and everybody's left me. You're the only one. And that person feels almost like obligated to come and all that. So that is another very faulty form of working. So we need to understand that at some point, when we say don't engage with the energy, it's good for your well-being. Because you keep giving conflicting messages to your mind and your heart, saying this has to happen and this shouldn't happen, it's going to be very, very difficult. So at some point, please realize that if you're in one of these faulty patterns, it's time to let it go and time to start looking at what you can do for yourself and to move on.
This reminds me of something that happened when I was like very, very young. And there was a proposal from a guy, and I said, look, this is not their age to be looking at romantic this thing. So just forget it, we'll just be friends, leave it at that. And then that guy started drinking as a method of coping with the loss and heartbreak. Half the times I think it is because of the kind of movies that we've been shown and the stories that we have been told, that moment you have a heartbreak, you start drinking and you start doing drugs or whatever. But I think at the bottom, it's just faulty coping mechanism, isn't it?
Yes, very much. Because any form of addiction, at some point, you're replacing the void with something. So, this person was creating so much of joy in my life. Now that joy is gone, there is a void. And so I'm going to fill this void with a substance. And all these substances have effects on the brain that sort of dull us down. And then we keep craving for that state where I don't need to take responsibility and I don't need to move on. And that's why that's also a very, very faulty coping mechanism. Grieving is a process, and like I said, it's not linear and it's individual. Depending on how intense it is and what your coping skills are. It can be 2 months, it can be 2 years, and I've known people who've grieved even for 20 years. Right, so I'm not going to give in our previous episodes we've given something where they can work on it. But the do's and don'ts are just so that no matter how much time it takes for you to identify what is a healthy mechanism and what would be a faulty mechanism is very important. And the more you indulge in the healthy mechanisms, the better it is going to be as you make sense of the grief and as you choose to move on. Because healing a broken heart, nursing a broken heart, and coming back whole in the whole process, or acknowledging your wholeness at the end of it, is a very individual process.
So Aarti, what we've done is we have elaborated on what are the do's and what are the don'ts, right? And I think it is always nice to have some sort of a ready reckoner, because as we process and as we go through our journey, it will be nice to have little milestones or little signposts that tell us, hey, you know what? This is what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. So, shall we do the do's and don'ts?
Yes, of course. I'll start off with the first do. So first, like I already mentioned, acknowledge every emotion.
Don't suppress or repress any emotion. The second one, which is a do, grow through what you go through.
The opposite of that, don't stay stuck in thought traps like, why me? I always fail in relationships. Nothing good happens in my life. The third do will be engage with thoughts and memories that are enriching from the relationship.
Don't engage with thoughts or memories that pull you down. The fourth do is be kind to yourself and know that you can bounce back.
Most important, don't be critical or judgmental of your own capacity, because many times we tend to pull ourselves down by being our own dangerous critical voice. Seek professional help and have a support structure either as family members or friends and people who have your best intentions and interests in mind.
And the don't is, don't think you can substitute this with addictive habits like drinking or doing dope or anything like that. It just is not going to help you at all. The next do is remember that it is not a linear process. Work with intention every time you see yourself sliding back.
The don't for that is don't distract yourself with social media, with a lot of other habits and things like that that are going to take you away from the core issue that you need to deal with. Find out what works for you. What works for another person need not necessarily work for you.
And the don't is very obvious. Don't ask someone else for the answers because you are the only one who knows the answers. So look within. Find pleasures in the small things because that is the building block to finding joy in meaningful things in life.
Don't expect a big breakthrough that one day you'll wake up and all this pain would have gone away, because remember, process means it takes time. And of course, embrace life. The most important aspect, embrace life and move out, meet people, take these experiences as they come.
Yeah, and don't shrink into a smaller version of yourself.
I hope today's session has made sense to you. Anu and I thought we were going to tear up and cry a lot. Surprisingly, it was very enriching for us to be able to speak about this pain.
Yeah.
And I hope that as we shared from experiences, without hurting or shaming anybody who made our life beautiful at one point and were the cause of pain at some other point, we want you to know that life sometimes gives us challenges that we are never ready to face. And I think in every heartbreak, there is so much love that we can discover. But never rush through this process, because it's very easy for us to say, we need to heal and all of that. Go through it very gently, like you would do with a friend. You need to be that best friend for yourself when you're healing through a heartbreak. It is a process that is well worth every effort that you put into it. And every time you slide, I'd like you to know that you're not alone. Each of us has stumbled so many times when we worked through grief. Irrespective of what the process of grief was, I want you to know that if you're still not able to do it on your own, it's okay to seek help, especially with a therapist who's trained to work with grief. Sometimes medication may be required, but many times a supportive friend or family, along with your own intention and a lot of effort, helps. And professional help will help you reach the destination of finding wholeness much faster. I hope today's episode resonates with you. And for me, it's been one of the most beautiful episodes I've done with Anu, because I think we put our heart out completely today. We kept it real till today, but today I think we put our heart out.
And it comes from a very genuine wish, which is our favorite from the uncoupling thing, right? Because
Yes.
what we wish for every one of you is a happy even after.
Even after. And
Yeah.
I think today we've been in sync with our even after.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do something I've never done, which is say bye.
Yeah.
So it's
Bye.
been a wonderful journey with you. Bye.
Bye.